narcissism, hush money, and spiritual abuse in the church. Now, those are things that don't sound like they belong in a conversation about church. Yet the truth is, they're all too common themes in churches today, and it's a conversation that we need to have. And in this episode of the Church Disrupted podcast, we want to finish out the year by going back to the very beginning. And in this episode, we're going to restream part of the very first episode of the Church Disrupted podcast. We're going way back to August 2023, and we know that many of you have joined us and joined the conversation in the months and the over a year since then. And this year, one of the things we want to do as we launch into 2025 is we're going to restream some of the old episodes that some of you may have missed. And you're going to notice if you're looking at this on Spotify or Apple that this is a half episode. But we're going to try to mark these so you know if you've listened to all episodes, what a restream episode is. But in this particular episode, we wanted to finish 2024 out by looking back at the very beginning and how this journey started with a candid conversation about narcissism, hush money, and spiritual abuse in the church. And we're going to talk about all of those things today. Now, as we head into 2025, SAI has some massive projects on the way, and we're going to be doing some things we have never done before that are going to make waves all over the Western world as we talk about church. We're going to give you a voice to help you hold churches accountable. We're going to give you a voice to start the conversation about things like this in churches in your own community. We're going to empower you, and we're going to resource and train the churches that want to create safe environments while simultaneously exposing the churches that want to hide and want to keep hurting people, okay? But before we get there, let's take a look back at the very foundation of this spiritual abuse conversation that we've been having for over 18 months now. So if you're ready, without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode. The final episode of 2024 is a look back to episode 1, Narcissism, Hush Money, and Spiritual Abuse in the Church, and why we have to have the conversation about these things today. It is time for the church to start calling its own fouls. Yeah. So let's talk about it today. Here's the big kind of elephant in the room with all the stuff that we're talking about. We're talking about a few big heavy hitters. We're going to talk about narcissism. We're going to talk about spiritual abuse. We're going to talk about hush money. How weird does that sound and feel to talk about hush money?
All those things that you're, besides spiritual abuse, if you just take out the word spiritual and just call it abuse, you're talking about
like the mob.
Sounds like the mob, corporate America, like these big time companies that gone under, you think in the news, Jeffrey Epstein or something like that. That's what you think of when you think of all that, not the church.
Yep. So hush money, narcissist, spiritual abuse. And here's the other part we're talking about. Why now is the time to do something about it?
Right.
Why we've got to stop ignoring it and overlooking it and saying it'll come out one day. Guys, we got to do something about it. If the church will start calling our own fouls, less people will leave the church because they'll realize, no, the church calls out abusers like everybody else. The problem is church scandals happen when someone else calls our fouls.
Yeah.
And people find out, like the Southern Baptist Convention, all right, on public record, that they were hiding for years and decades sexual abuse. That was what caused people to leave, the faith or to leave Southern Baptist churches. It wasn't the fact that people in their churches abused. That is going to happen, right? The earlier we call our fouls, the better. But let's talk about this. So hush money, narcissism, spiritual abuse, we need to start with some kind of common definitions. Because if we don't, we overuse labels like narcissism for real. Like we want to call everybody's not a narcissist. Well, that's a different podcast. Everybody is, but you are too. So everybody's not a diagnosable narcissist. Narcissism is a spectrum, right? A lot of people are scared of spiritual abuse because they think, oh, that's snowflake syndrome. That's just people going, oh, I got my feelings hurt. I'm calling it spiritual abuse. So we're going to define all of these. So we're starting with a good definition. Then we're going to talk about, hey, where do they show up in the church? Why do they show up there? What can we do about it? How can we heal? And how can we stop it from happening in the future? So let's talk about hush money. This is a really simple definition. I hate the fact that we have to talk about hush money. This is so stupid.
It's cringy.
Yes.
It is cringy.
Yeah.
Yet I've got the NDAs, man. Okay. I want to say raise your hand if you've signed an NDA, but that wouldn't be good with podcast hosts because there's a lot of NDAs.
Is it illegal to say you signed one?
It's not illegal for me. I didn't sign one. All right. It's illegal for people who I didn't sign one. All right. So it's a whole nother podcast. We're going to talk about the NDAs. Boy, that's going to be a cringy episode. You're going to want to listen because it's real, folks. It's real.
Yeah.
But hey, here's hush money. Hush money is money paid to a person to keep them quiet about something that belongs in the light. Every time there is money, and nobody's going to call it hush money. They're going to call it a severance. They're going to call it a gift for your family, especially when it's volunteers.
How about a love offering?
Oh my gosh. And some people are freaking out because they just heard that and they're like, Jeff, do volunteers really get asked to sign NDAs? Yes. Volunteers get asked to sign NDAs. We want to take care of your family. We want to love on you. We want to support you in this difficult time we caused in your life, right? So we give you this money. Here's the deal, though. That money, anytime it's given with the stipulation of your silence, it's because someone's trying to hide something that Jesus wants in the light.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? If they love you and want to support your family, that's called a gift. And you don't have to sign anything to receive a gift unless it's like they sent it UPS. And then maybe you need to sign it. But
most of the time, UPS guys sign it for you anyway.
So really, you don't need to sign that. But what do? They grab people. Hush money is used to keep them quiet. And it's usually when people really need money as well. So the church basically buys our silence. That's hush money. Okay. We're not talking about like some small under the table payment. We're talking about, I know of multiple payments by churches, some to volunteers, some to staff that were in the 6-digit range.
Mm-hmm.
That's tithe money in the 6-digit range.
Yeah.
Those are big $100,000+ checks because you know something we don't want you to talk about.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've also seen them really small. So they're not all that big, but that's hush money, right? Narcissism. Let's talk about this. I'm going to give you the clinical definition of NPD, narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
Only like 1% of people are diagnosed with this because, again, it's a spectrum. But you're going to hear some of these things from narcissism. But then I'm going to give you the 9 traits of a narcissist, and it comes in an acrostic that is going to blow your mind and make you giggle like a small child. Okay. Anyway, here's the boring definition. Narcissism is characterized by a grandiose sense of self-importance, a lack of empathy for others, a need for excessive admiration, and the belief that one is unique and deserving special treatment. Now, we all know people who fit those categories, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they're diagnosable narcissist, but we're all a little narcissistic. We're all on that narcissistic spectrum. So how narcissistic are you is the question.
Right.
So when you're looking at like church leaders, you're looking at business leaders, political leaders, but in our case, specifically church leaders, and you want to know, is that church leader narcissistic? You want to look for those things. Do they have that grandiose sense of self-importance, lack of empathy, excessive admiration, on and on and on? Now, here's the hard part. That is really easy to hide when you are charismatic and you're a pastor. You're rarely going to find a pastor that you say they don't have empathy. But I know a lot of pastors, when you get to know them really close behind the scenes, they don't have a lick of empathy. But it looks like they have empathy because they're so good at sometimes you'd say leading people, pastoring people, but I think it's really more of just the manipulation of using the charisma, right? But they look like they have it together. That's the clinical definition. Let me give you, though, the 9 traits. The 9 traits of a narcissist. And these spell out the acrostic, special me. Special me, right? And that's how I remember it when I'm looking. These are 9 traits. If someone has a good handful of these, they're fairly narcissistic, right? Special me. And I'm actually thinking of pastors who have they've just talked about how special they want to be, and they feel called the special things, and they just have this desire to be special. So when I see that, it reminds me sometimes of those pastors, but it's also just, man, it sounds so weird. Special me. So remember special me.
Honestly, I just
how
thought of
narcissistic someone
Elmo.
Elmo, special
Special
me.
me.
All right, so here's the acrostic, the 9 traits of a narcissist. The S in special me is for sense of self-importance, right? Now, again, when we talk about having that grandiose sense of self-importance, that sounds bad. But when you just talk about self-importance, in church settings, that comes across as a calling that is extra special in their life. Now, look, do you have a calling in your life? Yes. Do I have a calling on my life? Yes. There are pastors who really believe the calling on their life is way more special than everybody else's.
Yeah.
Right? It's bigger. It's weightier, right? And it's going to come across sounding kind of holy like that, but that's where this is going to come from, that sense of self-importance. How do you guys see the sense of self-importance show up like in the church? Can you think of any?
Well, kind of like what you said, that their calling is like, well, not just anybody could do this. Only I can do this. I'm special. I've had this amount of training.
Oh my gosh.
Where am I? Who am I?
Here's one that'll make you nauseous. Not everybody can run with us because we're so
I think
driven.
I heard that on a
We're so
podcast somewhere.
fast-paced.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. It
But
just
I've
makes
not-
me nauseous.
I've
Makes
not
me
just heard it on a podcast. I've actually heard it in real life. I've actually heard people say that.
I've heard it a lot.
Yeah, more than you'd think would be.
I've heard it in churches I've worked at, but I hear it all the time in consulting work.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard for us to hire people. We're really fast paced. We're really driven. Not everybody can run with us. And after about the 100th time of hearing that, every church is not specially driven. Every church is not a unique butterfly. If people can't run with you, let me just challenge you, Pastor, if you're listening to this. Jesus didn't call you to be fast paced and driven. He called you to feed and care for the sheep. So if you're running faster than the sheep, you've gotten confused about what you're actually supposed to be doing. Maybe you should slow down, backtrack, and get in the freaking sheep pen. Yeah. Just a little.
I don't think sheep are that fast either, are they?
They're not. They're not that smart either. But that's a whole separate thing. So anyway, special me. The S is a sense of self-importance. P in special me. I laugh every time I say it. Preoccupation with power, beauty, or success. So for some churches, most of us, we're never going to see a pastor that comes out and says, you know what, I would like some more power. I wish I had. They'll say, if they're going to say anything like this, they'll at least whitewash it to say, we want to steward well the influence that God has given us.
That sounds so holy.
Yeah, influence is just a special word for power, though. But here's how you'll hear it. Not just the preoccupation with power, the preoccupation with beauty. It's how we look, how we're perceived. We don't want anybody saying anything on social media that may make us be perceived bad. We don't want anything on the cameras that may make us perceived bad. We don't want to post anything online on a worship service without pitch correction because God forbid something's wrong with it. It would make us look bad. But let's go even farther. The whole preachers and sneakers movement.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I know preachers, plenty of them, that they've got to get a fresh lineup or a fresh cut before every time they speak. Every time they do a big event, they have to get a fresh cut and a fresh set of clothes for that event because they're so concerned and consumed with how they look. Yeah. It's that preoccupation with beauty. But then here's the other one, preoccupation with success. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Okay, talking about success. Healthy things grow. So let's talk about how much we've grown recently and how much God must be behind us because we've grown.
Maybe we should instead start talking about how healthy we've gotten instead of how much we've grown.
Yeah.
Because if healthy things grow, that's great, but growth doesn't require you to do anything.
Yeah. But the reason why it's not great is not only healthy things grow. Cancer grows.
Well, sure, yeah.
Yeah. Weeds grow. Lots of unhealthy things grow.
Well, you could say it that way, but I mean, also like weeds themselves are healthy. They're just not healthy to the environment around them.
It's not that I can say it that way. I did say it that way, okay?
Well, like cancer, yeah, it's terrible for your body, but in and of itself, it's healthy.
No,
within
it's
itself.
not because it's killing itself. It's a part of the body. Come on, man.
All I'm saying is that the organism itself is growing because it has its own healthy properties, but it is detrimental to the environment around it. So a narcissist can be super healthy themselves as far as, they're wealthy, successful, all that stuff, but they're cancer or they are manipulating and killing the environment around them.
And that's the thing, though. They're a part of the body. So if they're just healthy for themselves, they're actually destroying the body like a cancer just so that they can win.
Yes.
Right? By the way, that was a great example of we don't have to agree, because I didn't agree with a lot of that.
I mean, you started agreeing with me at the end. Let's just be clear on that.
That was really
you
just...
came around to my point of view.
Did I? Did I really? But no, it's the preoccupation with success. It's which list are we on? The best Christian workplace. It's fastest growing church in America, largest church in America. I am so sorry. There are thousands of churches on different lists. If I can't get on one list, I just choose a different list someone else didn't try to get on.
Yeah.
Create a new list.
We talk about all the time. We'll post on social media. Is it bad to post on social media how many salvations we had? No. But we're doing that just so people see we're successful.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm a marketing guy.
Yeah.
And so when you do something like that, because I've run social media for several churches, several different several. Just so you know, I'm not reacting to a specific one, but it's a bunch of them. And every time I'm asked to do that, the question is, what's that for? Who's that for? So if you're running your social media from a marketing standpoint, who are you trying to reach? Are you trying to reach your own church people? Or are you trying to reach outside people? Because the outside people don't care how many people got saved at your church, because they're not saved yet. They don't see the value in that.
That's right.
So what's the point of that? It's like what you said. Is it to make yourself look better?
Is normally to make ourselves look better to Christians down the street who are going to a smaller church and haven't come over to the dark side yet, right?
No, the
that's
light
what it's
side.
about.
Light side.
Okay,
There are lots of lights.
You're getting your metaphors
and
mixed
look,
up.
guys, there are plenty of great mega churches. I'm not against mega churches, but think about this. All of the things from the preachers and sneakers, stuff, to getting the, haven't had the nice clothes and the nice lineup and how I look on camera and all those things, to what we're posting on social media. Let's be real. Marketing, this. There are massive churches that paid for thousands of fake social media followers, or social media followers that don't even live in the cities where they have churches or campuses.
Yes.
Because they care about how they look rather than reaching the people where they're called to do ministry, right? Yeah. So all I'm saying is, when you think about the special me piece, right, that preoccupation with power is harder to see. The preoccupation with beauty and success, it shows up all the time in the modern church. All right, so special me, let's continue. Entitled. Very simple. There's nothing more to that. Entitled. But a lot of times it's entitled for our church. It's entitled for, hey, we deserve this. We should have been on that list. I can't believe I went to that event and they didn't have the right snacks in the green room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bro, come on.
Yeah. So far on this list, what I'm seeing is a lot of times leaders will wrap themselves up in the identity of your church. So you look like, well, it's not me. It's the church should have been on that list. The church should look good.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, but you wrapped yourself up in identity. And so on the inside, it's like, no, I should have been on that list because I'm leading the church.
Oh, yeah.
And so if the church is, then I am.
Well, if the church isn't on the list, it's like an affront to my identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? All right, so let's continue. The next one, in special me, can only be around people who are important or special. And it goes back to, I actually sat with a pastor. This is real talk. I sat with a pastor offering to give them, and I've done this with quite a few pastors, so again, this isn't anybody specific. I sat with a pastor and offered to give them time for free every month as a part of my way of serving the greater kingdom. So, hey, 4 to 6 hours of anything I do in my business, I want to give it to you. You'd be surprised how many churches I had to offer that to before I found anybody to take me up on it, because they all say, well, we can take care of it from the inside, or if you're not within our denomination, then we don't need your help. When I offer that to businesses, they snatch that up, right? But I offered him that. I said, I want to help in any way that I can. So anything that I offer for my business, you can have 4 to 6, free hours a month. And I kid you not, pastor looked at me and said, well, Jeff, thank you, but I don't see how you have anything to offer us that we don't already have. You see, let me tell you who we're learning from, who's pouring into my life, and started naming off celebrity pastor after celebrity pastor after celebrity pastor. By the time he got done, he wasn't even talking about celebrity pastors anymore. He's talking about, John Maxwell and other authors and people like that. And all I could think about when I left was, this guy really thinks that no one can help him except for this group of other celebrity pastors and famous people, can only be around people who are important or special. That's not going to be all the time, but do they have a lean toward that, right? Yeah, right. Or do they have the pastor's heart that wants to be around hurting people? Yeah. That wants to be around people who can't give them anything. You want to really know if a pastor's in a good place or not, how often are they spending time with people who can't give them anything, can't even afford to tithe enough to make a difference in their church?
Yeah.
Right? If you're spending time with those people, it's because you care about people, right? Yeah. All right, so special me continues with interpersonally exploitative for their own gain, right? And that just means using people.
Yeah.
Fancy way for using people. So how do you guys see that exploitation and using people show up in the church most often?
I mean, obvious answer is volunteers.
Yeah.
And to be clear, I don't think volunteering is, I kind of had some strong views on this lately, specifically.
Just lately.
Just lately. Well, I've really been thinking about it because when you talk about volunteers and you're talking about, we tend to in the church, and I've done this myself as a youth pastor, whatever, that we kind of think that volunteering in the church is the best way you can serve God. Oh, yeah. It's the end all. If you're not volunteering in church, then you're not really serving God on the level that you should be. Yeah. When really it's not about, I mean, it's not to say that volunteering in the church is a bad thing or that we don't need people to do it.
It's not a bad thing, but it's not half of your purpose.
Yes.
It's not the only way you can live out your purpose. Dude, we have churches, and again, I keep saying this is a whole nother podcast episode because we have like 70 episodes already outlined out, things that we'd love to talk about. Yeah. But I also just got a list of things that people wanted to hear us talk about yesterday, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a part of the Church Disrupted community, man, our catalysts and our table flippers, they get to tell us all the time like what they want to hear, and even some of the guests they want us to bring in to sit in one of the 4 chairs. We only got 3 today. We're going to have 4 a lot of times. Sometimes this chair is going to have a guest in it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You know? But we think about those things, and when you go to a lot of churches, all you hear is, we want to help you find your purpose.
Right.
Yeah. We want to help you find your spiritual gifts. We want to help you live out the life as God chooses to live. And then they don't talk about when you go to their next steps or growth track or discover name of whatever church one-on-one, right? When you go to that, all you find out is they're talking about tithing, they're talking about serving, they're talking about giving, and they're talking about baptism. That is it. And discovering your purpose and your spiritual gifts are only talked about in a way such as, how can you serve on Sunday morning? Are you called to be a greeter? Are you called to work in the parking lot? Or are you called to work with kids? Because basically, we boiled it down to your purpose is how you can help our church.
Yes.
Now, as an entrepreneur, you want to know what I've never heard a church talk about? How to live into your purpose as a kingdom entrepreneur. Right? How to live into your purpose as a ball coach.
Yeah. A lot of times those are part of the sermon series every once in a while. Like I've heard specific messages talk about that.
Not the actual track where we help you find your purpose.
Not the big thing. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, by the way, since you're not going to be here every day of the week, you can also do this. And by doing that, you can invite people back here.
Sean, are you saying that my entire purpose is not wrapped up in just Sunday morning? That I have a purpose Monday through Saturday? I might. Probably not, but maybe. Yeah. But we talk about that, and I know somebody's going to be listening to this who is in Knoxville, because that's where I live, and they're going to be like, I know what church you're talking about. No, you don't.
No.
Okay? Can I just tell you, I can go to over 100 churches right now, and what they're going to talk about in their growth track, next steps, discovery class, launch pad, there's so many stupid names, right? What they're going to talk about, they're going to talk about serving, they're going to talk about tithing, baptism, giving, all that, because it's a playbook. If your church does that, I'm not talking bad about your church. I'm saying there's a problem. The reason why I can say it, and I know it's not just your church, is because it's a playbook.
Yeah.
It's a playbook where if you push the right buttons, you can manipulate people to the right actions. It's not a playbook we find in Scripture. It's one that's taught by organizations and other successful pastors. Growth Track is brought to you by other people's successes with tithing. You know, that's right. What it is. Yeah. But that interpersonal exploitation, and it's things like, hey, you know, if you really want to see the kingdom grow,
then you'll do it.
Oh, yeah. So you talk about that. Man. I saw it in your eyes.
One of the really interesting things is, as I've done ministry over the years in lots of different communities and lots of different places, I literally would tell, because student ministry is what I've done. And I would always tell our students, you don't have to do things just inside these walls. The people outside of these walls need to be able to see Jesus.
That's heresy.
I'm so sorry.
In some churches.
This is one of those things we're not going to agree on. But like that's what I would tell people.
I'm being as facetious as possible.
I know. But I would tell people, and our students would really be confused. So here in Tennessee, for them to get college credit or whatever, they would have to do service hours.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, kids in the church would want to go back to their home church and serve in kids ministry. Whereas I was encouraging them to, let's go into downtown Chattanooga and let's go feed the homeless. Let's go to Nashville and paint some old lady's home who needs that.
Wait a second. Homeless people and old ladies on our purpose. Our purpose is butts and seats. Our purpose is baptism. Our purpose, here's the problem. We lose sight of our purpose when we count things that aren't our purpose.
Yeah.
And you know what we're never posting on social media, what we're never talking about at the business meeting, what churches are never celebrating? And I say never. Some actually are. Just very few.
There are some. Yeah.
We're not celebrating the amount of homeless people that we've served. We're not celebrating the amount of people who we've mobilized outside of our church with different organizations now, 501c3 organizations just within the community. We're not talking about, the homeless shelters. That we're not talking about the amount of homeless people we've helped find sustainable housing or get jobs, right. Or, and there's some of that, but it's almost an addendum to how many people do we have on Easter, right? And that's where that exploitation comes from of how many volunteers have you known who, man, that before you know it, they're all in, they're bought into the church, they love Jesus, and before you know it, they are serving 4 nights a week and on the verge of divorce because they're serving the church so much they're never with their family.
Yeah.
How many pastors do you know whose marriages are in trouble because they're never home?
Or that's all they talk about when they are home.
Yeah, church. That's what we talk about around the family dinner table.
Yeah, I mean, I when I was a youth pastor, I got that. My wife finally said, "Hey, we've got to set a time when we're not talking about this stuff."
You mean your wife didn't want to talk about nothing but youth ministry at your church?
To be fair, she says the same thing about business stuff that I do now too. But because I tend to live in that. But yeah, of course, you got to have time for your family. That's apart from what you do. It's apart from your job or your volunteer hours.
So let me just say this. And again, when I'm talking to pastors, I know that the people who need to hear this most are usually not listening to this podcast, right? So when I'm talking to pastors, I'm talking to those of you that want to be better. You want to grow. You're not really the narcissistic pastor, but you have those tendencies. The rest of the stuff we're talking about is so that the rest of our listeners, you can see those red flags and you can ask questions. You can push. You can find a church that's really healthy. But for the pastors that are listening, I want to encourage you. Paul talks about it in Scripture. He says that the husband is supposed to love his wife like Christ loved the church. And if at any point you find yourself giving more of yourself to Christ's bride in the church and the organization and ministry than you're giving to your own bride, then something's wrong. Your first ministry will always be to your family. And I'm telling you, if you go to a church and your pastor is never spending time with their family or they're always at the church, that is not a holy badge of honor. That means their priorities are misplaced. If you go to a church where there's always an event and people are always being asked to go do something, even good, with their family, and they don't, that church doesn't prioritize and prize giving people time with their families, something's wrong. We misplaced our priorities. All right, so special me. We've gotten through the S, the P, the E, and the C, and the I. Let's go to the A, arrogant. Arrogant. That one's simple. We talked about it a minute ago. I don't see how there's anything that you could offer me. Arrogant. Yeah. I don't know if there's anything we can learn from that small church. Arrogant. Right? Hey, I know that you see some problems, volunteer, but I've got degrees in this, right?
Yeah.
You know that I went to, a Bible college. You know that I've been doing this for 30 years, right? And have you ever experienced that where a pastor or a church leader almost treats you as if you don't know anything because you're just a layperson?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's arrogance. It's arrogance. It's arrogance when you're preaching on the weekend and in your preaching, you're talking about how special your church is. Yeah. Of course, you're not downing anybody else's church, but you're giving backhanded compliments. You're talking about how your church is above and beyond. I even think about it with the multi-site movement. And look, I've worked in the multi-site movement. There's a lot of good with the multi-site movement.
Right.
But how much hubris has to exist to believe that instead of calling a pastor from a community across your state or in a different state to plant an autonomous campus that you support, how much hubris does it take to say instead of that, we should plant another campus that looks just like our campuses in other communities and pipe in video teaching, because surely we're better at reaching people than any pastors who live there.
Yeah.
If more multi-site churches would become church planters rather than campus starters, I think we'd see a lot more change, a lot more positive impact on communities.
Yeah. Well, and speaking as a marketer, again, that's a terrible idea.
Which one?
To create campuses across an area, because the people are different. Even here in Knoxville, there's about 17 different demographics. Like you can have it's completely different. And I've done the demographic research here for that reason. And it's really, they're so different. And to place a mirror image or a copy campus, we can call it copy campus. I like that.
Looks the same. Guys,
It doesn't work.
Looks the same, has the same message, has the same stuff on the walls. This is going to blow your mind. There are churches that have a scent. Yeah. Every campus has to smell the same. They're using the same freaking Glade plugins because that's how the Holy Spirit moves.
I'm guilty of trying to create a church scent. You know,
we're all guilty of being stupid.
I mean, I just wanted a really cool church scent. But yeah.
Look, and seriously, there's nothing wrong with that. But when we get to that point, are we thinking about the wrong things? Are you telling me that that's what we're putting brain power on? And look, if it's a big church that has somebody full-time marketing, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Right? But there are churches that are trying to do this with just a few staff. There are churches that are doing this and putting staff resources and dollars into that when they're not reaching their own community. So again, not feeding the homeless, not taking care of widows and orphans, which what does Scripture say? Pure and undefiled religion is this, to take care of widows and orphans. So anyway, we get past the arrogance to special me, lack of empathy. The lack of empathy. And again, you'll see lack of empathy show up more with interactions with staff members than you will with individuals in the church. Because again, pastors would not be in ministry long if they weren't charismatic and they couldn't make people feel like they love them.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But I'll say this, and Corey, you were a volunteer, so you haven't seen this as much quite as like Sean and I have. We both worked on church staffs, but you've seen it just by being close to staff members, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy the way that pastors and church leaders will talk about other pastors and church leaders on their same staff, right? I'm going to throw this out there. Pastors, would you be willing to open up your email or to open up your text messages and let people read them publicly? Or would you be embarrassed the way that you've talked about some people? Lack of empathy. I've heard this, man. I think it's a lack of empathy. That person can't be on stage because they're fat.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
How?
I think
is
that also
like
goes
Jesus
back to the other one about the beauty.
Yeah. Well, so many of these overlap. It's it's the pastor who, look, in church, are we going to have to fire people just like any other time? Yeah. Right. But there's a difference in firing people, and so many stories of pastors, men and women who aren't even in the ministry anymore because of how they got fired. Mm-hmm. There's no moral failure. You're not doing a bad job. We've decided to go a different way for whatever reason. We don't want you to be here, and we are so cold to you. Yeah. When we're telling you you're let go, we don't want to talk to you. And then we give you a paper that says you can't come back to our church, but we'll give you some money and support your family if you don't ever say anything bad about us. And then you're totally disconnected from your entire community. There's no empathy in that. I have, in the consulting world especially, I've talked to some pastors and said, hey, it's okay if you want to fire this person. They probably don't belong here. But one is the church. You need to give the most generous severance. Right. You need to make sure their family's taken care of. You need to help them to find another job where they will fit. And here's what I always remind them. They are still a sheep in your flock. Mm-hmm. That fired staff member is still a church member until they find their next home, which means you got to care for that sheep. So if you aren't willing to walk with them more closely, with more love in this season, then you aren't ready to fire them. Right. Lack of empathy. All right, special me.
I've been on both sides of that. I've been let go a couple of times, and one time it was with a lot of empathy. Well, it wasn't at first, and then some mistakes were realized, and they came back and they corrected it, and it meant everything to me.
Dude, that's awesome.
It changed everything. And then there was another time where it was the exact opposite. And so, being on both sides of that, you can show empathy when you're letting somebody go. It is possible. Even if it wasn't done in the right way in the first place, you can come back and correct that mistake.
Right. So you're saying a pastor actually, they fired you or had a bad conversation with you, there was no empathy. They came back around and apologized. They came back around and like they changed something, changed direction to make it right.
And not just apologize, but followed up with action.
Wow.
And it's not because I went to them and said, hey, you really hurt me. They just realized their mistake and said, hey, I realized this wasn't handled the right way. I am so sorry. We're going to make it right. Not only that, they took care of our family. That's and awesome. They really made a difference. And so
that's awesome. Hey, pastors that are listening at this point, that's it. Yeah. That looks like Jesus. You don't have to get it right up front. But when you realize you got it wrong, man, come back around. Do your best to make it right. All right, the last two in special me, must be admired. How many times have we seen those pastors, man? Or sometimes it's just church leaders, directors of ministries. I have to look good. I have to be well thought of. I have to be admired, or I'm going to go on a rampage. Yeah. I'm going to be in a bad mood and everybody's going to feel it. Wait, I still remember working on one staff, and we would take a survey every year, to get on one of the, top places to work list, right? And those are in every industry. I hate those lists. They're all gamed, right? Yeah. They're all gamed. And employees, there's so much data out there that employees don't feel comfortable being honest on them. They don't think they're anonymous, right?
They're not.
I talk to business leaders about this all the time. But that list came out every year. Usually the survey landed this church on the list, but it was well known. If the survey results weren't good, even if you got on the list, if they weren't as good as they wanted them to be, that senior pastor would be in a pouty, crybaby toddler mood for the next 3 months, and they would take it out on every single person on staff. It was like a witch hunt with a smile to find out who said bad things. Let's have like ministry departments meet and let's just talk. Hey, you three guys in youth ministry, we just want to make sure, our survey results weren't good. We want to help make sure this is a great place to work. So, tell us how we can improve. And the whole time they're just writing notes like who's given us input that makes us think they may have made a bad comment or left a bad result, right? And it was terrible. So what happened? Eventually people started telling them on the surveys what they wanted to hear because nobody wanted to deal with the toddler temper tantrum of a 50-plus-year-old pastor. At some point, we got to grow up in ministry.
I'll say that I've never worked in ministry and, that's been my primary employment. But I have been in workplaces where you've done those type of reviews and tried to get your company on the list. Yep. And even in those places, when there's a less than admirable comment, it's amazing how much better those companies have handled it than I've heard of churches doing it. Like I've heard of companies, I made some very negative comments once to a company that I work for. And it was nowhere near as discreet as I was under the impression it was. Mm-hmm. So I got a very uncomfortable conversation. What it did is it opened the opportunity for those things to be reviewed and for someone to ask me questions about my experiences. So while I was concerned initially, what happened was that it was a very admirable way that it was handled. And those concerns, I was able to get all those things that I was concerned about addressed and resolved without feeling like, my job was in jeopardy or that suddenly that things, or I was going to have to deal with someone who's all pouty. And it's amazing how much different the church has handled those. And that I've known a lot of people who've worked on staffs of churches in lots of different cities and lots of different states. Yeah. But it's amazing how much differently I've heard of that being handled in those environments than I have even experienced myself.
You know why?
Why?
Because when we're in the church and you feel called to ministry, and you're a pastor, you're a minister, you're a ministry lead or director, our identity gets tied to our calling. It is way easier for a business leader to fix it because their identity is not called to, their identity is not completely tied to what they do, right? If my business goes under tomorrow, you know what I'll do? Start another one. Yeah. I mean, dude, my identity is not tied to that. When I was a pastor, there was a long time, like I'll fully admit it, there was a long time where my identity was who I was as a student pastor at that time. And I remember telling my therapist, I said, I feel like I'm one mistake away from every person in my life walking away. He said, Jeff, what do you mean? You're surrounded by people who love you. And I said, yeah, but if I left the church that I'm at right now, how many of those friends are real?
Yeah.
How many would walk away? If I made the wrong mistake, would my wife leave me, with all these things? But what we came to was a lot of it was tied to identity, much more so in the church even than personally, right? Because I thought the people who loved me, cared about me, everything was only because of what I did.
Right.
You know, so that just gets into huge pieces. And then the last one, special me, envious of others and believe that others are envious of them. I can't tell you how many pastors I know who it's like they're always looking over their shoulder. They always think people are looking at them. Pastors of churches, pastors of especially evangelical churches. It is worse in the evangelical movement. And again, I work across all denominations. It's definitely worse. Pastors in evangelical churches are like the middle schoolers of ministry. They think everybody's looking at them all the time. And the truth is, nobody cares because they're too busy looking at themselves. Yeah. That's churches. But we think the other church and pastor down the street's looking at us and judging us, and and we're looking at them, and we're envious of what they have that we don't have. And it's crazy how that envy gets in there. Now, a lot of this is not easy to see. Some of these things are easier to see as a parishioner than they are with others. Others, it's really hard to see if you're not on staff. Yeah. But all of these things they're basically examples of narcissism.
Yeah.
Right? So the next time you're wondering, hey, is this leader really narcissist or not? Don't just label them a narcissist. Go through Special Me and ask, are they fitting these criteria, right? The 9 traits of narcissism. I'll give them to you one more time all at once. Sense of self-importance, preoccupation with power, beauty, success, entitled, can only be around people who are important or special, interpersonally exploitative for their own gain, arrogant, lack of empathy, must be admired, and envious of others, right? That's what it is. And I'll tell you this. You want to know how to handle a narcissist when you come into contact with one? Because this is the tough part. If you can recognize that your church leader's a narcissist early enough, you can just leave.
Yeah.
But if you're on the spiritual abuse side of a narcissist, they don't want to let you go. They want to control the narrative. They want to control what people think about them. The number one way to wrestle control away from a narcissist is to cut their control of you with boundaries and truth.
Yeah.
Here are clear boundaries I'm going to put up. These are the things I will do. These are the things I won't do. These are the things that are not going to fly. They're not healthy, right? And then tell the truth. Nothing will piss a narcissist off more than when you tell the truth. I've had ones that wanted to control everything that was going on. And the moment that we started telling the truth and not sharing their narrative, they left us alone, right? They were no longer trying to control it. Unfortunately, what do we learn in churches a lot of times? We get guilted into don't tell the truth. You don't want to hurt the bride. You don't want to make people who don't know Jesus think badly about the church. We essentially tell people, if you say anything bad about the church, you're going to be responsible for people going to hell.
Yeah.
So then we don't say anything. We feel guilty, and we let the narcissist keep us control. So if you feel like you're in a situation with a narcissist where you need to gain back control, especially with spiritual abuse, okay, clear boundaries, tell the truth. That's all you got to do. You'll wrestle back control. So let's talk about spiritual abuse, and then we'll just get into, hey, how can we handle some of these things? How can we move forward? How can we make it better? We've talked about hush money. We talked about narcissism. Spiritual abuse is a really long definition.
I don't think we talked about hush money yet. We just mentioned it.
Oh, no. We talked about hush money. Yeah, we talked about hush money because it was such a simple definition. It was.
Oh, well, we talked about the definition of it.
Yeah. So the spiritual abuse definition is like paragraphs. So we're just going to hit highlights of this. We're going to kind of go through this. We can put it in the show notes where you can find some links to look up more stuff. But spiritual abuse, let's just be frank. It's not just general church hurt. It's not just getting your feelings hurt. Spiritual abuse is a form of emotional and psychological abuse. It's like anything else. I have PTSD both from growing up in some abusive situations in my home and from spiritual abuse. And they have affected me on the insides in very, very similar ways, right? The triggers are a lot of times the same. But spiritual abuse can be characterized by a systematic pattern of coercive and controlling behavior in a religious context. Those are the key words: coercive or controlling. Yeah. It doesn't. It could be about things you do, different like moral stands that they take. But it could also just be about controlling your time as a volunteer, coercing how you think, coercing the story that you tell. Anytime someone is asking you to tell a story or a lie to make people look good or to hide the truth, that's coercion.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's a big piece of it. Spiritual abuse can have deeply damaging impact on those who experience it. Okay? And all of this is coming from a recent book that I read, Escaping the Maze of Spiritual Abuse, right? Tons of good stuff there. But this abuse may include, I'm going to give you the big long list real quick, and then we'll talk about it. Manipulation, exploitation, enforced accountability, censorship of decision-making, requirements for secrecy and silence, coercion to conform, inability to ask questions, control through the use of sacred text or teaching, requirement of obedience to the abuser, the suggestion that the abuser has a divine position, isolation as a means of punishment, superiority, and elitism. Which ones of those stick out to you guys? What have you seen most?
Yeah, I've seen all of them. Isolation, I think, sticks out, but I'm not sure I've seen isolation as much as a form of control. It's just more of a byproduct of what happens, because I've seen so many pastors who have gotten fired or staff members, and not only does nobody talk to them from the church anymore, but nobody talks to their kids. Like their kids are feeling it. The whole family. So it brings about a sense of isolation because as a byproduct of all of that other stuff going on.
Well, and it doesn't always have to be for control.
Right.
But part of that is on the front end. If you see people being isolated, then if I leave or if I speak up, I may lose my entire community. So it's both tied to control and not. But I've experienced it, man. I mean, my wife and I lost our community overnight. There are people who have said they loved us for a really long time who, dude, they won't talk to us.
Yeah.
They blocked us on social media, right? There's an entire staff at a church that's not allowed to talk to us. It's been made very clear. But you talk about the kids, it's one thing. I can handle it.
Yeah.
I can handle it. But when it affects my kids, when they're losing their community, when people aren't checking on them, when it's causing them to, in some ways get really cynical to the church, that's a bigger deal. I think Jesus talked about that. Something about, hey, go drown yourself in a river. That's the Jeff paraphrase, right? But it's a big deal when you hurt those little ones. And we don't think about what spiritual abuse to parents does to kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So isolation, what else sticks out?
I think something that I was thinking as you were reading that list was, by and large, the basis for the deconstruction movement, whatever you want to call it, is this list.
Oh yeah.
It's this. So if you ask, I'd say, and I can't, this isn't facts verified, but I would say 9 times out of 10, if you ask somebody why they're deconstructing, whether that's just like, hey, I'm trying to figure out what I believe, or I don't believe anything anymore, it has something to do with something on this list.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, things like manipulation are so widespread, but what did it start with? The authors of Escaping the Maze of Spiritual Abuse, they said, this causes deep damage.
Yeah.
Right? There is such a thing as spiritual PTSD. It's out there. Yeah, we'll talk to people about it. And pastors and church leaders will say, it's not that big of a deal. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. You're making this bigger than it really is. Look, and you guys have probably seen this post on social media. I don't know who to credit it to, but I remember seeing it. Something along the lines of, when I tell you that you've hurt me, you don't get to say, no, I didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? You may not even agree with it, but the amount of times that we have people in church settings that they hear something like this and they say, hey, grow up. Don't make such a big deal out of it. You need to calm down. Again, you need to check your heart. Don't let a root of bitterness grow up. All of the things. And then you add on to it the guilt of, think about all the people that will go to hell if you make the church look bad. Now, did they say it like that? No. But that's the implication.
I mean, sometimes they say it like that. I mean, just to be clear, sometimes I've seen people say, well, you're making, how many people are going to walk away from the church because of what you're doing or because of the truth that you're telling or your perceived truth or whatever they say. I mean, I've seen it.
Crazy.
People, short of saying you're sending people to hell, but essentially.
Well, here's the problem. When people say that or imply that, those church leaders or those Christians have such a low view of God, I want no part of their faith. Zero.
Yep.
If I can do anything to cause someone to go to hell, then I can also do things by extension to get them into heaven.
Yeah.
And last time I checked, I can't even control myself.
Yeah.
I'm screwing up all the time. I'm not responsible for anybody going to heaven or hell.
Yeah.
God will use me. God will use me in people's life. But dude, the guilt, the spiritual shame, that itself is a deep manipulation that will stick to your core. I can't tell anybody about what happened. Because think about the people who go to hell. Let's make this just take it a little farther. Spiritual abuse can be sexual abuse. Of course, not all sexual abuse is spiritual abuse.
Right.
We have a whole lot of people who will say spiritual abuse isn't real. It's just a bunch of snowflake Christians who get their feelings hurt, get their panties in a bunch about nothing. It's not a big deal. They need to get over it. But we'd all agree, right? I think we would all agree. I've never met a person that would say sexual abuse is okay in the church. That's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And it should never happen for any reason. Yet if you watch the Secrets of Hillsong documentary, you'll see that there are people who didn't say anything for a long time about spiritual abuse. There were kids who went to parents and said, I am being sexually abused by a pastor. And those parents would say things like, now think about all the good that man's done.
Yeah.
You don't want people who don't know Jesus to think bad of the church, do you? You don't want to be the one responsible for ruining his ministry. Not just kids. You go back and you look through church history and you're going to find in the last 50 years a lot of women who were sexually assaulted by pastors who were told the same thing. Again, why are people watching The Secrets of Hillsong in such droves? Why are they watching Shiny Happy People?
Yeah.
Right? All of these documentaries are coming out. It's because so many people have experienced that shame that I have to hide because I don't want to be responsible for someone going to hell. Anytime someone makes you feel that way, they are hyper abusive and you need to get out of the situation.
Well, I want to say something that seems like it should be extremely obvious. If you say something is happening, it's not you that are turning people away if that does happen. It's the person who did the abusing in the first place.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
100%. I mean, that seems like it's a no-brainer, but a lot of times we forget that. Like, well, I don't want to, if I post this on social media or if I say this story to somebody, then I might be responsible for them turning away. But the person who initially did the abusing is the one who should be responsible. That pastor who was sexually abusing kids, he's the one who's responsible for turning people away from Jesus, not the person who's speaking out.
Me telling the truth about sin that was committed by someone else, pain that was perpetrated by someone else, that's not my fault. It's their fault. So I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to look right in the camera right now and challenge you. When we stay silent and when we stay quiet, that's when we play a role in the abuse.
Right.
And guys, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm not trying to make you feel ashamed. There's a ton of reasons why you would stay quiet. I stayed quiet for years. I completely understand it. But part of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing now is because I know that when I stay silent, I allow it to happen again.
Yeah.
When I actually say something, then people can say, no, that's not okay. We've seen that happen before. They can see it coming. But when we stay silent, we allow spiritually abusive leaders to continue to abuse. Now, I don't think every spiritually abusive leader should be removed from ministry. If they're willing to admit the abuse and they're willing to repent and work on it, then dude, we all make mistakes. Now, there are certain things like, look, any sort of sexual abuse, you're done. You're disqualified from ministry. Let's be real. But if it's just, hey, you got a manipulation or coercion, and we can prove this pattern, if you'll admit to it, like the pastor did to you, then man, you don't have to miss a day in ministry.
Right.
My problem is not with pastors that abuse. I've even abused. My problem is with pastors who can't recognize abuse or repent when it's brought to them.
Yeah.
They'll die on that hill. Not only would they die on that hill, they'll turn themselves into victims. Pastors who abuse people are not being persecuted. You're not being persecuted because you love Jesus or because you're a man of God. You're being persecuted because you did stupid stuff and you hurt people.
Yeah.
That's not persecution. That's consequences.
Right.
I think you missed something there, but
What I
they
missed?
also need to be submitted to there should be some sort of an authority looking in on that to make sure that abuse doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
So if there is abuse that's happening, I agree. You don't always have to be set down and removed from that ministry, but there should be some sort of a plan put in place to make sure that doesn't keep happening.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of times there's not enough accountability. We've got fake boards. sham boards that are scared to death of having to run that large church if a pastor's removed, and there's not accountability.
Right.
There's not even accountability. I mean, guys, you know this. There's not even accountability for people to have conversations, to even face someone who says, I've been spiritually abused. I think I've been spiritually abused. But I say all that to just say there are a lot of people who have been made to think I'm crazy. Okay. Something's wrong with me. I'm just being soft, when they have been abused in such a way that in any other arena of life is criminal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually have to do training. A lot of times, just did one recently with a youth ministry team. We have to do a training on mandatory reporting. In the state of Tennessee, there are no mandatory reporters because everybody is lawfully required to report.
Right.
Everybody, right? Yep. And did you know you are lawfully required to report? It is criminal to see emotional abuse and not report it.
I didn't know that. It's great.
It's criminal.
Didn't know that.
Right? Yeah.
I did know that, and it's been difficult, but there have been times when I've had to report abuse.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was trained to know that I even realized that was a criminal issue that I was ignoring.
No, it's like we show it. If you actually go through the Tennessee Department of Children's Services, they have a training on it. They have slides where it shows you the law. Comes with civil penalty. It is a criminal act to not report that. Yet in churches, we don't talk about it. It's adults, it's not kids, and we don't think about it. This is deeply damaging stuff. We're trying to take the stigma away from spiritual abuse. Yeah. If you have been spiritually abused, you are not being soft. You are not being sensitive. You have been mistreated by people who represent Jesus in a way that Jesus would never treat people.
Well, and just say to pastors, just like it happened with me, it can be fixed. Most of this stuff can be fixed with a conversation and maybe some action behind it. Not everything can be fixed with the conversation. Let's be clear on that. I mean, there's some stuff that, like you said, there's some things that it's like, hey, you're just done with ministry. You just have to be. You've gone over way too far over the line, right, and you're done.
Yeah. And you can be restored. We need to say this.
Yeah.
You can be restored as a person. You can always be restored as a man or woman of God. Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily mean you should be restored to a pastoral leadership role.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a high calling. And I think I want to give the benefit of the doubt and restore pastors anywhere that we can.
Yeah. But
I think we're restoring way too many pastors. There are some that have made it clear that's not your role anymore.
Yeah. But if you take some action and really get behind it, you can fix a lot of stuff. You can fix the system, and when you start fixing these kinds of systems, we start fixing the spiritual abuse and the narcissism and all that stuff. When you start fixing that, you'll start to see your church be healthy. You'll start to see it grow beyond whatever it did before. Even if it's not necessarily you're growing to like 10,000 people or 20,000 people, you might be growing in your community. You might be growing in other ways because you're healthy. You see that numerical growth isn't the only form of growth.
Yeah. But it takes conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's what this is all about. So, hey, episode 1, and we could go so far. We could do multiple episodes on just spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
We could do multiple episodes on just narcissism. Probably couldn't do multiple episodes just on hush money, but man, we could have a fire.
One full one.
We could have a fire episode on hush money. But the reason why we started with this is we wanted to start episode 1 to say the stuff we're talking about. I realize there are going to be some people who say, Jeff, you're being too soft. You're being too sensitive. We've got this church hurt, victim mentality, spirit call, everything abuse mindset. And that's just hurting the world. That's hurting the church. And I need you to know the stuff we're talking about, it's not those things. It's not those things. It's actual, real, traumatizing and damaging abuse. Okay? It's narcissistic tendencies that are leaving a mark that will settle on people sometimes forever. We talked about you can't always move on.
Yeah.
You can just move forward.
Right.
So, hey, I know not everybody's going to agree with us, but I would challenge you with this. If you've listened this far and you're still mad and you think, you know what, these guys, they just want to call everything abuse. They just want to label everybody a narcissist. They want to do that. I love you. And at the same time, I believe that attitude is contributing to abuse every day. I believe that attitude is part of the problem. So if that's you, we're probably not the podcast for you, but I would really challenge you to look into yourself and say, why is it that I find myself attacking people when they say they've been abused or mistreated? Even if they're somewhat wrong, right? If we don't first listen, we can't learn.
Right.
And when we say, oh, they're just playing the victim card, or, oh, they're just labeling people as abusive, they're just, they need to check their heart, all those sort of things. Guys, that is an attack. It's a whitewashed attack on someone who said, I've been abused. And the answer is, no, let me tell you what's wrong with you. And it's just another version of gaslighting that does deep, deep damage. So let's talk about this as we kind of wrap up this episode. We've talked a lot about where these things, spiritual abuse, narcissism, where they show up in the church. Why do you think they show up in the church? Why does narcissism, spiritual abuse, hush money, all these things, why are these toxic behaviors showing up in the church so much today?
I don't think it's just today, to be honest. I think it's been happening all the way through. I mean, you see Paul writing about other pastors and other church planters who are doing these things that they shouldn't be doing. He may not have gone into complete specifics on every detail, but I mean, there's always been stuff. And I think it comes down to it's a different form of power. It feels different than, like, governments have certain power over their people. Kings have power over people. And you see that in those situations as well. I think it's kind of the same thing. Like, a business owner doesn't have the same power over an employee or even a consumer as a pastor would, because there's a deeper connection that's a spiritual connection. Whenever we think of spiritual connections, we think of something very deep within inside of us.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to leave. I mean, if you just started a church, you say, wow, these people are crazy, I'm leaving. That's easy. You've been at church for 20 years and you're like, I'm starting to see some really bad behaviors, but I'm going to stick it out.
That's
because
my family.
I'm deeply ingrained in this. And I think that's why you see it. It's because, and I think nepotism plays a huge role in it as well. And nepotism isn't just family. It's friends, and I think that's how it creeps in. I think there's some really good intentions at the forefront with the lead pastor and all that, and then you get family, friends who you trust in there, and maybe they're not given an opportunity to go outside and really learn what it means to be outside and fail. They sometimes people aren't given the opportunity to fail when they need to be failures.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you're right. It's not, nepotism is not just family. Yeah. We've actually got an entire episode coming later on talking about inbreeding in the church. And it's that kind of stuff, man. It goes down to even the ideas that we believe, right? The people that we listen to. What about you, Corey? Why do you think this is showing up so much right now?
I think that we live in a day and age where there's so much more recording and there's so much more openness. Like, it's not uncommon for someone to go to their special group of friends on TikTok and talk about their struggles in life.
Yeah. It's
not uncommon for someone to have a YouTube page where they're talking about, and they're talking to people who they may never know in real life. So we as a culture are recording these things more now. Mm-hmm. So the things that used to be kept in the dark are now being put out front and center. The things that used to be happening where no one was recording and discussing are now being publicly discussed. So it's not that it's something that's new. Like, we all know that, like you were talking about Paul, but also there were times when there have been completely rewritten texts, removing words, removing things that are not what someone may want to hear, to disguise and to make them feel that, yes, this is exactly the way God said what he said, when really all they've done is remove some words and alluded to some things to make you fall in the line. And there are, historically, there have been texts found where there have been passages, chapters, and books removed.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't line up with what someone believed.
And it's, I would say even way bigger than anything that's been removed. When we translate certain versions of Scripture, which translation does your church use? The translators are making decisions that sometimes there are specific words that maybe for centuries have been translated in one way, and we make very intentional decisions to translate them differently because we don't like the theological implications of the way they were translated. And when I say that, most people think, oh yeah, it's all those liberal Christians wanting to get a new liberal translation. Most of the time, it's actually conservative denominations and translators that are behind it. Even with things like women in ministry, hey, how can we translate this in a different way? How can we make some different decisions, right? I think why it's showing up so much now is because I think we care so much about image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I actually do think it's worse. And you guys have this fantastic perspective, but I think it's worse right now because we've never cared more about how we look, because we've got a persona on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and YouTube, and everybody wants influence and everybody wants to be an influencer, and we care so much. I cannot fathom that 50 years ago preachers were even thinking about, I got to get that lineup or the new sneaks before I go preach.
I don't know. I mean, you've got the I grew up in you wear your best to church on Sunday.
Yeah, true.
You know, they might have got the newest suit.
Yeah, but
tie.
that was
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
Right. If anything, the pastor, would do less of that. But I think there's also so much about, it's not just the way we look physically, it's we want to control what people think about us.
Yeah.
And when you are worried and you are consumed with what people think about you or they think about your church, and I'm not just talking about church leaders, I'm talking to everybody who's listening. When you're consumed with what people think about you, you can't serve anybody. And you can't be you. You can't show up authentically if you're worried about what people think. And God has never called us to be anything but authentic.
Yep.
Man, I think that's what's causing it. And to have some empathy, pastors, especially of larger churches right now, and if you take it even farther, not just larger churches, but maybe they followed their dad or their uncle or someone else in ministry, there is so much pressure to grow the church, to look good, to not let my people down, to not let my family down, to not mess up what the pastor before me did. There's so much pressure. Yet what did Jesus say? He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened." Right?
Yeah.
My yoke is easy, my burden is light. And I think it's that all-consuming struggle with, we want to control what people think about us, that leads pastors into this place, because that's all insecurity. And insecurity leads you to do one thing. I've got to fight back for control because control makes me feel secure. If we could have more secure people in the pulpit, we would have less spiritual abuse. We'd have more people willing to own up to it. So again, pastors that are listening, man, I wish every pastor would be in therapy. I wish every pastor would have a therapist, even if you're just seeing them once a month. Because man, if we can get healthy and we can get secure, we don't really have anything to prove. So kind of last question, it's a two-part question, but I just want you to speak really to the listener right now, to people who are watching this on YouTube, listening on Spotify, whatever. We see these things, we know they're wrong. Many people have seen these in their own churches. A lot of our listeners, tons of our listeners, have experienced these kind of abuses. They've been on the receiving end of narcissism. They've been offered the hush money. Maybe they regret taking it, right? Maybe they didn't and they're hurting because they didn't. What can we do about things like spiritual abuse and narcissism in the church? And more importantly, beyond what can we do, how can people move forward after they've been spiritually abused?
That's a good one.
And I know this is just an opening salvo.
Right.
This is episode 1. We're going to talk a ton in our community beyond the episodes, ton of the episodes about specific ways to heal. But just as someone's beginning to engage in healing, what would you say to help them? Hey, what can we do about this and how can you move forward?
I think talking is really important. You have to have people around you to be able to discuss those things that hurt.
Yeah.
As long as we are keeping it in the dark, you won't heal from it. So if you can put a voice to those pains, if you can put a voice to those struggles, like that's something that's been really key for me as I've been healing from things from childhood, was, the relationship that we've built here. I've had a safe place to talk about those things.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of safe people for me to have those conversations, from therapists to pastors to friends. I found really safe people for me to have conversations with. And it's been something that's I've been able to heal through those conversations, but more importantly, it's empowered me to be able to be that for other people.
Yeah.
So that's what these communities are going to be about. It's for us to create safe places for people to have those conversations.
Yeah. Well, because it's not, Sometimes that can feel like gossip, but it's not gossip because you're not having conversations with everybody.
Right.
You're having deep conversations with people you can trust or in safe spaces. And that's, Church Disrupted, all of our online communities, it really is about that. It's places you can tell your story where people aren't going to judge you, but they're also not allowed to trash the church.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to trash individual people. But I think telling our story, man, it's so good. Telling our story does two things, though. One is it helps us process and heal.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is when we tell our story, it allows other people to listen and say, okay, now that I know what's happened, I can recognize these things when I see them happen in my own life, my own faith community, my own self.
Yeah.
My own self. I bet almost every single podcast host that we have in our hosting community could look back and say, I've got examples of where I've spiritually abused people, where I've abused people, where I've gaslit people close to me. Again, it's not the end of the world when we know that. And when we have these conversations, I'm not just thinking, oh, that pastor did you wrong. That church member did you wrong. I'm also thinking, man, I do stuff like that sometimes. I need to begin to look inside myself and see how I can be better. So I think it's a double-edged sword that's powerful with those conversations. Sean, what about you, man? What would you tell the person who's, man, they want to make a difference with church, or they're just trying to walk out the beginning of a healing process?
I think there's two things. I think a lot of times we forget to lean into God in those moments. And that doesn't mean like you got to study the Bible from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. and you have to have 2 hours. You just got to lean into them. Just be like, hey, and first step is to realize that God didn't hurt you. And I know earlier I said that's Christianese, but it's true in that sense. Like God didn't actually hurt you.
But he cares about the hurt.
He cares about the hurt you're going through. And while people would say, yeah, he could have stopped it if he wanted to, and he could have, and maybe there was there's a reason he didn't. I don't know what that is.
Can I challenge something there?
Yeah.
What if the way God wants to stop it is us standing up and saying that's not okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and like your hurt, like for instance, your hurt, my hurt, Corey's hurt, is a catalyst because we're here trying to help other people who are going through that. Mm-hmm. And if I hadn't experienced that hurt, I won't have the same perspective as I do right now.
Yeah.
But lean into God, and then build a community that you can have conversations, like Corey said, but also of people who will carry you when you can't walk, because there are going to be times in the healing process where you can't get out of bed, maybe, or you can't go to church. You're like, I can't even step foot in a building. Doesn't mean you hate God or you've walked away from your faith, but
you were there the first time I tried to go back to church.
Yeah. After
the latest church hurt we went through, and I've spent my whole life in church.
Yeah.
Came to a church you and your wife invited us to, and dude, I was just trying not to throw up through the entire service. I was that sick and nervous and not myself. I love what you said though. When you talk about, not just perspective, but leaning into God, oftentimes what we do, and I mean, I'm guilty of this. Mm-hmm. When I've hurt the most, especially with church hurt, it's when I go to God the least. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to stop praying entirely.
Yeah.
It's so easy to stop reading my Bible entirely.
Yeah.
It's so easy to stop telling people how I'm really doing. Hey, how are you doing? I'm okay. I told more people I was doing well when they knew my life was falling apart, and I didn't do it on purpose. I would just, it was a go-to. So, I mean, I would encourage listeners to double down on what you said, because I think it's so powerful. When you've gotten hurt, don't run away from Jesus because people weaponize Jesus against you. But 100% talk about it, 100% get healing, 100% protect yourself from things like that in the future. But when we want to be in the Bible the least, when we want to pray the least, when we want to meditate the least, and if you've never been a big Bible reader, you don't have to start reading the Bible now.
Yeah.
Maybe it's meditation for you. Maybe it's, maybe it's prayer. Maybe it's just more conversations with believers about my spirit feels numb.
Yeah.
I mean, that was me. My spirit felt numb. Like the inner part of me had died a little, whatever that is for you, man, I just want to encourage you to do it. You're not going to feel like it. But when you can start pursuing God or faith on your own, it's when you realize that your entire relationship with God wasn't tied up with that church or that leader or that person who hurt you. And I think that takes away, again, talking about taking away control from the narcissist.
Yeah.
That takes away a lot of control from them and gives you control back when you realize I can have a relationship with God that is separated from those people who hurt me or people who could hurt me. That's not an excuse to not ever go back to the church, of course.
Right.
But that's what's helped me get back into church,
Mm-hmm.
because it's been a reminder as I've leaned into God on my own. Okay, God, I haven't stopped believing in you.
Right.
I have stopped believing in some systems. I haven't stopped believing in you. I haven't stopped believing in churches. I have stopped believing in some systems of thinking, certain types of leaders, maybe even certain denominations. But I haven't stopped believing in God or faith.
Yeah, exactly.
So, any other parting words just for our listeners today?
I want to tell any any listener.
Yeah, so you got it too.
Here.
It's late.
Ooh, it's late. Yeah, any listener who this message has really resonated with. We want to be here so we can help you start to heal. And maybe this episode, has really gotten you upset. Maybe there's some tears that have flown. Like I've felt some tears as we've been recording today. But maybe this is where you need to be. Maybe God is using this as an opportunity for you to feel that connection, that you know that you are still loved by him, that you are still one of his own. And although you've been hurt, that's not where you should stay. So we want to be that for you. We want to give you the opportunity to say, and if all you got is some breaths, breathe heavy.
Yeah.
Breathe heavy. And maybe next week you'll feel like there's a word there. And it may just be one word. But we want to be able to make this a safe place for you to walk into that, to start feeling that healing, to start seeing some of those wounds and uncovering them so you can start to let them heal.
Yeah. Well, and we're not just, we keep talking about this community, and that's not because we want money or anything else. Guys, we believe in it. Not just Sean and Corey, but all of our hosting community that you're going to meet. They're in the community, interacting with our community members every single day for no reason other than we love you and we understand the pain you're going through. We can't put ourselves in your shoes. We don't know what you're going through, but we understand the pain, and we believe at the same time, very kind of churchy sounding thing, but I believe it completely out, even outside of church. I believe your best days are ahead of you. You don't have to stay in this place that you are, and we would love to help you heal. All right, guys, so that's a wrap. That's it. That's the last episode of 2024 before we head into a massive January. We've got new content coming soon, and you're not going to want to miss any of the conversations that we're having in January as we highlight Spiritual Abuse Awareness Month. And again, we got some projects that we cannot wait to share with you starting in the coming weeks. But I hope you enjoyed that look back at our what part of our first conversation that we ever had in front of the mics with Church Disrupted. Now, that was only part of that original conversation. It was pretty long. So if you want to check out the entire conversation and be reminded of the podcast rules and why we started in the first place, you can check that out by clicking right here. But otherwise, we'll see you next week for the very first episode of Church Disrupted in 2025. And hey guys, before we finish out, I want to invite you, if you haven't partnered with us yet, would you consider partnering with SAI and Church Disrupted financially in 2025, or by giving a single end-of-year donation for 2024. We are a registered 501c3 nonprofit. Everything that you give goes 100% toward projects to help spread awareness about spiritual abuse, stop spiritual abuse, and create safe and healthy church environment. So again, if you haven't partnered with us yet, but you're in a place where you can, we would love to invite you to join us. We've got a lot of stuff on the frontier that we want to do, a lot of things that we want to roll out to help people, but we can't do it without your help. So if you haven't partnered with us financially, you can do that here. You can click on this link and you can give at SAI, whether that's, again, a one-time end-of-the-year donation for 2024, or if you want to make a monthly donation, a recurring gift in 2025, that helps us the most. Also, stay tuned. Starting next week, we're going to actually start rolling out information about how we can connect with different people who want to volunteer. Many of you have been asking, how can we volunteer? How can we play a role in what's going on of the Spiritual Abuse Institute. And again, throughout January and February of 2025, early in the year, we're going to be rolling out some different opportunities for some of you who have been asking to join in the mission through some volunteer roles. But as we talk about so often with exploitation and volunteer misuse in churches, we want to be really careful that we're always protecting you and your time, okay? And if you're not at a place where you can do either, thank you for listening. Just by listening and just by sharing, you're supporting this work. Clicking play every single week makes a huge difference, and it helps us to reach more and more people. Also, if you haven't this year, if you haven't left a review or a rating on Spotify or Apple, or if you haven't, followed, liked, and subscribed on YouTube, would you consider doing that as well? Every little thing that you can do to partner with us helps us to reach more people. And again, guys, we're so grateful for you because we couldn't do it without you. But that's it for the very last episode of 2024. We'll see you next week for episode 1 of 2025 as we dive headfirst into Spiritual Abuse Awareness Month in January. We'll see you there. Until then, grace and peace.